Welcome to Mamahood After Trauma, where healing and mamahood intersect. I'm Emily, your host. Join us as we discover practical strategies to nurture ourselves with kindness and understanding. Stay tuned for insights and inspiration to support you on your path of healing and growth. Let's dive in together. This is Mamahood After Trauma. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I am so honored and thrilled that you have taken some time out of your busy mama schedule to tune in and listen to this episode. Today, we're being joined by Kyira. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for joining me today. So let's dive in. Could you share a little bit of your story about how you came to be in the space that you're in now?
Yeah, sure. So I think I am a mom to, she'll be 4 at the time we're recording this episode. We're leaving tomorrow on her birthday trip. She'll be 4 in a few days. So
Oh,
we're very
wow.
excited about that. She's also sort of the timestamp because she was born and then lockdown happened 2 weeks later. So she's kind of my timestamp for where we're at in terms of when the pandemic started and how life moves, which I'm sure there's a lot of other moms that have
Yeah.
navigated their parent
Yeah.
journey through that. But I, prior to becoming a mom, struggled a lot, had a lot of trauma growing up, my own childhood trauma. I was raised by a single mom and then by a single grandma. So raised by 2 single women throughout my life, had really no insight into the depth of my trauma, honestly, though, until I was pregnant with my daughter and doing
Mhm.
some therapy work. I had struggled with an eating disorder in my 20s and I had done some therapy and was aware that things I had gone through weren't the normal childhood experience, but I really wanted to work with somebody while I was pregnant to be like, hey, I am now a licensed therapist. I work with people with eating disorders and trauma. I work around shame. Pregnancy can be a trigger point.
Mhm.
Let's just do this and hopefully it's all just preventative and there's really no need that I'm here other than just talking about normal scary things. But if something does happen and I get triggered or whatever, then it's there. And very thankfully, I didn't have any eating disorder urges, old voices, kind of thoughts come back around that. But I did have a lot of processing. And I realized I was a mom. I was about to become a mom to a daughter. We knew that she was biologically female at that time. And I had very traumatic relationships with my mom and my grandma.
Mhm.
And there's just a lot of intertwined components to that that I don't think I was fully
Mhm.
mindful of coming in.
Mhm.
And now, like I said, I'm still a therapist. I work, I would say at least 50% of my caseload right now. I do mostly coaching is moms and moms to young kids. And I'm sure part of that
Mhm.
is the universe and the energy and people finding me that are in a slightly similar situation. But it's been a very interesting thing the more I come to understand myself professionally and personally and recognizing how much trauma and whether someone's using big T, small t, whatever that is, how that affects the way that we show up in the world. And then how much pressure that adds to an already overpressurized role of being a mom in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first became a mom, I was not as aware as you were as a licensed therapist, and like I got side railed by the trauma train with
Yeah.
my baby daughter sitting in her swing in front of me thinking, I do not want to cause her to feel the same grief and a lifetime of dealing with the actions and behaviors that I act out
Right.
in her life, because at that point I didn't realize it, but for me, I had a lot of mama trauma. And I say
hmm
mama trauma because it was mothers for
hmm
me were unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the complete opposite of the norm.
Right. Right.
So,
And I think
yeah.
that's an interesting thing because it sounds like both of us in different storylines. I think because I was only around women and raised by women, I had a lot of fear of men.
Mhm.
But I had a lot I still have a lot more distrust and a lot higher of a bar for women in any sort of a maternal position. And yet I'm always aware that I'm kind of seeking some sort of actual healthy relationship with a woman that could be sort of a parental figure in a way. And so it's a really weird thing. It sounds like you did get
Yeah.
that insight moment that was like, oh goodness, I see this. And I think a lot of people have that where they go, whether it's trauma or not, they go, I don't want to perpetuate what my parent or my caregiver did. I'm never going to do this, or I'm always going to do this because we know the pain that we've endured and we don't want to inflict that on someone else. But
Yeah.
naming it is very different from having the capacity and doing the work to actually break trauma bonds and patterns in our thinking and
Mhm.
behaving. And so that part's really tricky because I was like, gosh, on one hand, it's great. But on the other hand, it's like I put myself on a pedestal. Like, so then I should be able to do this perfectly because I help people do this all the time. So I should be
Mhm.
able to have it handled. And that's not fair. That's not reasonable for
No.
any, but it's that piece of like, I can't ever do anything that could ever make her feel the way that I felt or make her feel. For
Mhm.
me, a lot of it was insecurity around like any form of knowing someone would be there and be there unconditionally or,
Yeah.
lying or being honest. Like these are all things that I was like, I don't ever want to do that. But then on the flip side, you realize if you aren't taking that story off a little bit and learning how to exist without that story being your guiding force, all you're doing is basically switching from one end to another. And they're all still connected to the trauma instead of saying, I need to deal with this, release it, take with it from what I've learned, what I need,
Yeah.
and then figure out my mom journey with my kid separate from that. So it's not inadvertently writing my story. And that part's really tricky.
Yeah, it is really tricky. And for me, one of the biggest challenges I had was differentiating myself, like baby Emily, from
Yeah.
my daughter, and
Yeah.
differentiating myself from my mother and me as a mother. Like
Hmm.
that was deep.
Was your fear that you would become your mom? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom left and my nervous system was telling me to get the
Ah,
heck out of there because that is unsafe. And I was like, "No, if I run, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm repeating the cycle. I have to stay and figure this out."
what an interesting thing. And so you basically got to this place of like you felt this urge, like I have to leave because that's what was modeled is
Yeah.
like, go, this is hard, leave. And so instinctually you had some sort of reaction that took you in that place, but you had enough awareness to know I don't want to do that. And this is really effing hard. And I don't know
Yeah.
how to do this. And I don't have any metric or system or model to base this off of. So I feel like I'm floundering again in an already overwhelming role. How do
Yeah.
I find footing and how do I love this little human? And I don't know if this happened to you, but there are moments where you're like, if you've gone through trauma, like I spend my life sort of ready for people to leave. So I
Yep.
always like brain will
Yep.
randomly start to imagine what would happen if somebody dies, what would happen
Yeah.
if they
Catastrophe
just walked out. Yeah. And I'm planning for it.
catastrophizing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm not
Waiting for the other shoe to drop.
exactly. And so even with my daughter, it was kind of like I could feel this. I didn't want to get too attached because
Mhm.
what if something happened? And at first it was, I think, very normal postpartum hormones of like everybody has those thoughts. They don't want to admit them of like, what if my baby dies? What if I accidentally kill my baby? What if I'm just walking and I drop that? Like there are all these thoughts
Yeah.
that are very normal,
They're
anxious thoughts,
yeah.
but no one wants to say them out loud. Like I remember standing at the top of the stairs one time and being like, oh my God, I could just drop her right now. And like, I was
Mhm.
like, oh, Does that mean I want to drop her? I don't want to drop her. I think I like my kid, like this very overwhelming piece. And I talked to my therapist. She's like, no, this is just very normal thoughts because you don't know how to make sense of something that now is a totally different role and responsibility than you've ever had. And so everyone gets that a little bit, but I could tell like I was almost guarded from wanting to bond with her in the beginning
Mm.
because it was like, that's just not what I do. I don't, I don't love at that level because that's not the safe place to be. And having to learn how to take that down
Yeah.
with now still a relationship with my mom that is terrible. She doesn't know it. She has no idea that it's terrible. I've learned over the years that it is likely that she struggles with some covert narcissism and some very like egocentric, like her world revolves around her. And when she
Yep.
had me, she basically idolized me
Mm-hmm.
instead of connecting with me. I became like the shiny toy. And then she struggled with a crack cocaine addiction and she left. And then it was in and out of my life. And she was the trauma for me was less that she left, but more she'd come back and be high, or she like there would be a consequence of something. I mean, there's so many different pieces. And then she's like, I'm just going to kill myself. And she didn't actually mean that she wanted to kill herself, but she would do these things that I've learned were very performative, very like they very much line up with covert narcissism of like, I'm going to go so extreme in this side that you have nothing but pity for me so that you
Mm-hmm.
have to be here to help me. And so my relationship with her was founded on such unhealthy dynamics, very codependent
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't know what that looked like. So it's like, gosh, how do I love my daughter and not make her responsible for my emotional well being? When
Yeah.
right now it feels like she's responsible for all of my emotional struggle because I haven't slept. You know, at this point, it's like I haven't
Yeah.
slept in months. I don't even know if I want to do this. And like I'm very overwhelmed, but how do you not put that on them? And then how do you
Mm-hmm.
let them in a healthy way where you don't, where you can recognize what a boundary looks like healthily with your kid? It sounds like for you, your boundary was like, well, people just either they just leave. Like there is
Yeah.
nothing. For me,
Yeah.
it was like, well, they're there. They are just glomming all over you and then they're gone. So I only knew those two sides. So it's interesting just how much when you peel back the layer, how much that really does affect the way that we're viewing how we take on that role of momhood.
Well, yeah. And especially if you if you've grown up in that situation where people just up and leave and maybe they come back when it's convenient for them, maybe they don't, and your nervous system doesn't know how to be calm, and now you're dealing with an infant who their mode of communication is crying,
Hmm.
and your nervous system doesn't know doesn't know how to handle that,
Hmm.
and it's a lot.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think it's a lot for people, you know, before I had a kid, you'd hear about things like people shaking their babies or doing things like that. And you're like, gosh, I don't know how anyone could ever do that. And then you go through having a kid. And most of us, again, like even being a therapist doesn't mean that I had all of the emotional awareness and skills and tools or knew how to put them into practice. Again, I might have
Mhm.
known them logically, cognitively, but internalizing them is really hard. And you can start to see the unraveling that happens for people. And the scary part is for many of us, maybe we have somebody that can pull us out of that. I was very thankful. I have a partner who does not have any trauma, is very, I would say, is constantly in a state of rooting. It
Mhm.
is like my favorite thing about him is that ability to, he maybe doesn't always know what to do, but he like, I feel rooted around him.
Mhm.
And so he could come, he could see that when something was happening to me and he'd be like, your brain can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
You're getting to a point like where, you know, there was one day I went in, she was crying again. And but it was, we would joke that like the best way to wake her up was to put her in her bed to sleep. And like, then that's just how you're
Yeah.
going to get, which is, I think, a lot of new babies.
Yeah. Yeah, you put
But
me down, I'm awake.
yeah, right. And it was COVID too. So I
Yeah.
had, I mean, nothing because we made it,
Yeah.
he was working in the emergency department. And so we're like, we're already at an increased risk. Like he's around COVID every day. So I didn't go anywhere but walks with Everly and being in my house. And that was also a form of trauma that a lot of people weren't
Oh, yeah.
really seen yet of, like, how traumatizing is that? I don't even have another mom at the playground that I can talk to about,
Yeah.
like, "Gosh, this is hard," and, like, "What do we do?" So you're lonely, you're in it, and your story is, "I should be able to do this. I should be
Mhm.
able to handle," especially after a trauma, for many people, the internalized story is that you have to be able to handle and move through everything. Don't be an inconvenience. You've gotta toughen up and take it on. I know it's a little chip on your shoulder. That's it. Like, nothing should break you, but you're feeling like you're breaking. And so there was a moment I remember where I mean, it had been days of just not sleeping, and she was still in our room. And I had that, like, the World Health Organization, the CDC, everybody tells you they're supposed to be in your room for a certain amount of time. You're supposed to breastfeed for a certain amount of time. All these rules, which again, most moms struggle with, but particularly people with trauma, the expectation of perfection can be even higher. I
Oh,
have
yeah.
got to do this right. I have to follow the rules. And so you're trying so hard. And she was just started crying. And I got up and I was like, Jesus Christ. And Jordan looked at me and he goes, I think we hit our breaking point.
Mhm.
I'm gonna call in. I'm gonna stay home. Let's figure out how you can leave for a little bit. And it wasn't mean. It wasn't you're failing. It wasn't anything. It was like, this is
Need a
not
break.
you anymore. Yeah, you're crossing a point where I don't think I never ever got the urge to, like, wanna go in and, like, yell at her, but I know that I would get those urges to just scream. I
Mhm.
just wanted it to stop. I wanted to feel, and it felt like I shouldn't hate this so much, and so that part was really tricky, and then I would get the space, and then I had a therapist, and my therapist was like, "Here, we gotta move her from your room. She doesn't
Yeah.
wanna be in it. She is telling you she can't be around you, and you can't be around her. Neither of you is sleeping. Neither of you is getting a break. She needs to be in a space where she can feel calm and relax, and she can't do that in that space." And I remember having a total breakdown of, "I failed. This is me. I
Yeah.
can't handle this, and I'm bringing the energy in the room, and she can't be okay." And she's like, "Whoa, let's, like, bring that back. This is just a human trying to communicate her needs, and you're trying to learn and communicate yours. This is a
Yeah.
brand new relationship. Both of you are new to this relationship." And I think that reframing was so powerful. I'm not supposed to know how to do this, and that belief or
Yes.
expectation, like I should, actually robs me of the opportunity of creating a healthy interpersonal dynamic with my kid because I'm
Yeah.
not listening to their cues. I'm listening to what someone else is telling me or what Instagram told me or what my trauma brain is telling me is the
Mhm.
reaction instead of going, this is what I want to do, building the insight around that, like we both have, had to do. And then what are we need to do collectively? Gosh, she's telling me this. How do I respond to
Yeah.
this? She's indicating this, or my body's telling me this. Clearly, I am
Mhm.
trying to communicate. I can't be around her right now. And that doesn't make me a bad mom. So it's the problem was I'd force it till I would
Yeah.
break. And I'd be saying Jesus Christ in the other room and I'd be feeling terrible and yelling and saying things that I don't normally say instead of going, oh, your body probably told you a week ago you need a break, but you
Yeah.
didn't listen to it because you've been expecting it to perform at a level it can't.
Yeah.
And you aren't giving yourself any grace to recognize that this, even though this might not be quote unquote trauma, it is activating so many of your trauma responses from lack of sleep, from the crying, but also that overwhelm and a new relationship that you don't know how to develop in a secure way because you have never had it modeled.
Yeah, that is huge. First of all, feeling that you should know how to parent a child you just had,
Yeah.
like, you're both navigating that, and I think so many moms, whether you've got trauma or not, they feel like they should know how to do this thing with a child that they're still learning, like, they're still they're still learning their personality. The kid is
Mhm.
learning how to live life on the outside, like,
Right.
and secondly, acknowledging, being aware of what your body is telling you, because as trauma survivors, we've been conditioned to ignore that internal gut response
Yes.
just to power through and survive and do the thing and not be a burden, sit down, shut up, and
Yep.
do your thing. Like, don't be a burden.
Yep. Well, and I think it's that piece of, a lot of the people that I work with now, that's what I see is that you can do that until you can't. And so what people do then, and particularly again when they've had some form of insecure attachment and or trauma, is now everything is about it's performance driven. You have to go,
Mhm.
go, go. Like you said, shut up. Don't be an inconvenience. You can't have a problem. You can't have anything that takes away from you being something to everybody else. And so you
Yes.
go, 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 go. You're high performing. You're looking for some state of, if I can get to here, maybe I'll feel like I can be in the room with everybody else. Maybe I'll
Mm,
feel enough. Maybe I'll feel good enough because you have this thing that even if you talked about your trauma, it still feels like a secret thing that just
yeah.
like takes you out of the running to be normal in the same way. And so you see other people functioning and you've always got this thing that makes you feel like you've been othered and not in a good way. And so
Yeah.
it's that needing to work through that piece because what happens is then you go, go, go until you can't. And then
Yeah.
you are screaming in the other room, or you end up shaking your baby, or you end up doing something terrible that you don't know how to walk back. And the reason those things happen is because you've reached a point of burnout that your brain and your body is in such a state of survival mode, it doesn't know what to do. It takes all logic offline and you're just reacting. And for
Yeah.
many of us, it's either aggressively or we shut down. So
Yeah.
you either pick a fight, you're yelling, and that could be at yourself that it gets really big. It could be at someone else, or you completely shut down and you detach. And that's a lot of moms that they just do
Mhm.
that and they're just sort of existing in that state because they don't realize that they've been in this pattern of doing till you break and then you
Yeah.
heal 5%. So you get back on that treadmill and you keep doing until you break. And that's the part that I think we need to
Yes.
break as a system of
Mhm.
realizing we can't function that way. And
Yes.
particularly if you have had trauma, it's not a weakness. It's accepting that your brain functions differently. It has different needs in the world, and how you show up for your brain in those moments is the most important thing to help you start to break those cycles. So if you don't want to pass that on to your kid, it's less about how you're interacting with them and more about how you're interacting with yourself during those cycles and experiences, because that's the part
Yes.
that's going to change the self talk that then changes the way you show up with your kids. When you get that day where you had a break, where you get that day that you slept in, you're a totally different mom because you were able
Yeah.
to get what you needed internally. If you go maybe after a really good therapy session or a great walk with your friends or whatever that is. So it's really thinking about what do I need to break some of those cycles and what are the stories that even though I feel like I have to do them or I should do them, doing them at a certain point means I know I'm going to burn out or it's not,
Yes.
it's not sustainable. Something's going to happen. I do eventually become a version of myself that I don't want to be.
Yeah, for me, it was the light bulb moment was recognizing the symptoms of me completely abandoning myself.
Mm,
Okay, so now I've my mommy abandonment issues have transitioned to abandoning myself.
hmm,
Um, and noticing the behaviors that come up when I am abandoning myself and I'm not paying attention to that voice or that internal feeling that I have when I need a break.
right.
I get bitter, I get grouchy, like salty as can be.
Hmm.
And my husband usually gets the brunt of it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's how it's how it is, I guess. An area that I need to work on. But simply noticing that so that I can check in with myself
Hmm.
and say, well, hold up. It's not
Mhm.
okay for me to act in that manner. I need to listen to myself and I need to take a break. I need to
Yeah,
listen to my body. I need to trust that my body has got me, because your body's main objective is to stay alive.
right. Well,
That-
and I think one of the things that's really key in what you said too is recognizing when you get to a certain place, how you react. And I think
Mhm.
so most of my work that I do is around shame and shame resilience. And so that's really kind of the focal point that I see everything coming through. And so shame is the fear of not being enough, good enough,
Yeah.
worthy,
Yeah.
lovable, whatever it is. It's the fear of not belonging because you don't
Yeah.
deserve to be in the room. You can't be a part of it. You're again on the outsource or the outside. And so I think for many people, you know, their trauma happens at and whatever point it does in their life. But if you think about basic human development, especially if you had trauma as a kid, none of us would opt to going back to being like a middle school kid. I would never want to
No.
go through that experience again where you every
Oh.
day feel like garbage and you feel
Mhm.
like you're gross in your body, you're failing at something else. These people don't want to be your friends anymore. This person's doing this thing. You're in these old jeans that were a hand me down and somebody pointed it out. You didn't do as well as your friend on the test. Like you're just trying to find an identity, but everything feels competitive because our brain is just trying to like get up for air and it feels like you're sort of swarming with other people around you. And we don't have a culture that really supports you don't have to be the best to be something. And so
Yeah.
when you think about that sort of pressure point, for many people, their trauma happened either before that or they've experienced some sort of trauma during those critical periods of development, maybe middle school, maybe kind of in their college years or early teen years. But a lot of these kind of early developmental times in life when we're figuring out who we are, even in your early 20s, there's a really
Yeah.
significant shift that happens in our brain and our sense of identity. And so when that happens, we've already come into this world in a rat race of feeling like we have to
Yeah.
be good enough, worthy enough. And that comes from a lot of systems, whether that's your family unit and the expectations there. For many of us, we experienced conditional, not unconditional love. So it
Yep.
was you have to be quiet, you have to be this, get these grades, do these things. Okay, great. So that tells me I'm only good enough if these things, if somebody
Yep.
gets the A, they're treated differently than somebody with a D. So you
Mhm.
see this layer into it. Most people listening to this show, if they are biologically female, identify as female, think about sort of the influences of, yeah, on the female body of what you're supposed to look like, how you're supposed to act,
Yep.
all of these pressures, all of these internalized pieces layer into it, race, socioeconomic status. The pressure is so high. And then trauma basically says, we're going to throw one more thing in there that basically just takes this ball that you've been trying to roll up this hill and this is the hill that you think is going to get you to success. And we're just going to take it and we're going to flick it over like 6 hills over that way. So
Yeah.
now you get it back over here or find another route to get to the other side of this hill. And you're like, well, what the hell? I've been working really hard and like, I don't know how to do this. And so you don't realize that that's happening in the moment, but basically it's a complete new layer of
Mhm.
other and it completely deepens that shame. Now you're really not good enough. Now you've got to try
Yeah.
even harder. And you've got this unresolved pain that you don't really know how to make sense of. Likely the people around you didn't handle it the best way. And that's not because they didn't care, but it's because most people don't know how to deal with trauma effectively in the moment or after. So layer all this in, and you've basically got this feeling of, I am not good enough. And my entire focus now to survive is I have to make everybody else think I'm good enough so that I'm allowed to be in the room. Because if I don't have connection,
Yeah.
I can't.
We interrupt this amazing conversation for a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster in mamahood? Ready to break free from the fear and frustration that's holding you back? Introducing Mama Untriggered, private podcast series, a transformative 5-episode journey to help you calm your nervous system and reclaim your strength in mamahood. In each episode, we'll guide you through practical, actionable steps to understand your triggers, build your trigger toolbox, and harness the power of community for support. Say goodbye to those moments of overwhelm and hello to more peaceful, empowered you. You didn't become a mama to spend your day on edge. It's time to take control of your emotional well-being and create a positive, joyful experience for you and your littles. Ready to break free from the emotional roller coaster? Subscribe now to the Mama Untriggered private podcast series and start your journey to a calmer, happier mamahood today.
So then it's job, it's whatever it is, it's your relationship. Once we become parents and we're out of our element, every single one of us is bonded by the fact that we feel like a terrible parent or a terrible caregiver, whatever it is. We all feel it. We all feel like we're failing. And yet we get so tunnel visioned that because our shame is so about us, I'm the problem, we can't see the universal experience. So then it's, I'm screwing up, everybody else has it figured out. And then we turn to social media. Look at that. How come that?
Yeah, that's a prime example.
Exactly. They've got the books rotated. Look at their babies doing tummy time already. They're walking at 6 months, whatever it is. And then we jump there. As soon as we feel that notch, you didn't get something cleaned up, your baby, you planned this beautiful sensory activity and your baby just kind of looked at you like this is dumb and didn't do it. Now you feel like you screwed up somehow because they didn't engage in it the way that the Instagram video promised you that they would. Whatever that is, you immediately feel like I'm exposed. Someone's going to see that I'm not good enough. And that's where you react. And those reactions become either trying to people please even more, dig our heels in. We got to try harder, 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 harder. We shut down, we avoid, we detach completely. Or the third one, which it sounds like is what you do with your partner and what I used to do with my husband a lot, is the pushing against. Now I feel like garbage and I feel like I'm on the floor here. The only way that I can feel okay enough to be in the space, and we're not cognizant of it, again, it's reactive, is I need you to be down here too. So I'm going to pick a fight with you. I'm going to bring you down. I'm going to find all the reasons that you suck too, because at least then I'm not alone. It reduces the threat of othering. And that's where I think so many of us spend our time, is we're reacting from shame, either going. No, I can handle it all. Yeah. Layer it in. Oh, yeah, sure. I'll take that. I'll keep going. You know what? I can keep working full time while my baby has croup. And I've got all these, and I haven't slept in 3 days. And I've got my own therapist that I haven't been able to get into in 3 weeks. I'll be fine. Or the flip side of, I flip out, I shut down, everybody else sucks, the world is a problem. And I think both sides of that, we end up kind of flip-flopping back and forth between, and that becomes our existence if we don't stop. And that was a very long explanation, but if we don't stop and really think about, oh yeah, it is deeper than this. It is everything that Kyira just said of, I have been telling myself this story for however many years old I am. My body, like you said, is trying to survive.
Yeah.
This is the way it thinks that it can, because I've told myself that I don't have the luxury of being able to take a breath and feel at peace in my body because somebody will see my flaws.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was managing my black cloud, the black trauma cloud that hovered over my head, no matter where I did, what I did, who I tried to, what therapist or counselor I was seeking at the time. It was just there and I had to hide it. I had to manage it. Couldn't let it show because then I wasn't perfect. Then I didn't earn the love that I desperately wanted. And it was just a gong show.
Because your story was, if somebody saw my cloud, they couldn't love me.
Yeah.
Would you tell your therapist? Like, would they get to see it?
I didn't have a therapist long enough to let them in that much.
So even them, it was like, even this person that it's like, hypothetically, they're supposed to be the person I share this with.
Yeah.
There was still this like, I can't let you see. It would be too vulnerable, too risky.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I accepted it as normal.
Mm.
My life's always going to be this way, was
Have
always
you,
going to be this way.
right. Did you ever let anyone see it?
Um, well, my husband saw it postpartum.
Yeah. Probably not because you wanted him to, but because you didn't have any capacity to hold it
I
in.
couldn't hold
That,
it in any longer.
once he saw it, did it make it smaller?
No. Once I named it, then
Mm-hmm.
it made it smaller.
Okay. So him seeing it was still sort of a threat. Once you named it and gave it like
Yeah.
actual space in the world, then it didn't have so much of that ambiguous power over you anymore.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, I feel like I say that to clients all the time when they're first meeting me is I find it so fascinating that when you see a therapist and I'm sitting on the other side of knowing someone for 5 minutes, that I have sort of the audacity, but also there's an expectation that I'm going to ask you questions that you wouldn't answer for anybody that you've known your entire life. And you're just going to
Mm-hmm.
unpack this for me right now. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
And so it's such an interesting thing. And I think what many people forget, we know that healing from all of our trauma, the healing requires connection. You have to talk about it. If you
Yeah.
don't name, if you don't talk about it, it's exactly what you described. It stays there. It gets bigger over time. It takes up more
Mm-hmm.
space. You almost feel like you as Emily are squeezed out for whatever that black cloud story is. And I think it's an oversimplification to just say, well, we got to start talking about it because it's the same. I mean, shame and trauma, they overlap. And so same thing, we have to talk about it. But that is such a vulnerability risk to like
Oh, yeah, it's
name
huge.
stuff and put it out there. And then you don't have control of it anymore. Because
No.
now if somebody else knows your story, you don't get to contain it in the same way, even though you're not really containing it because it's consuming you. But
Mm.
now you don't feel like you have the same
The illusion
power.
is gone.
Exactly. Even though the illusion was never as good as we've told ourselves it was to begin with. So it's such an interesting thing. And so I always tell new clients that of like, I'm not going to ask you to share things. I'm going to ask you hard questions. And then I'm going to give you this, like, please reserve the right to say, I'm not ready.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to not be ready. If you can tell you're never going to share it with me, you have to do yourself a favor and quit working with me and find someone else because you don't have to tell me right away. That's not a right that I have to know your story immediately, but you do deserve to find somebody that you are willing to show that whole cloud to down the road because that is literally the only way that it doesn't consume you anymore. Because then, and I don't know if that's what's happened for you, but the goal with any sort of trauma is to integrate the story, to say
Yeah.
this thing happened or these things happened, this relationship occurred. I am not okay with it. I didn't choose it. I didn't like it. It had effects on me, whatever validation you need to have. And I am a whole person that will not be defined by that or spend my life hiding that. I'm going to integrate that story and then not allow it to take the driver's seat. And so once we get there, it makes a big difference. Like now that I can name stuff with my mom and what I've felt, and even now there's this dynamic of because she's still in my life, I'm having a lot of processing of our trauma, realizing I'm never going to get the healing that I want with her. My trauma
Yeah.
happened, most of it was when I was 10 to 15. She's never talked about it. She's never owned it. When we've started to talk about it, it always cycles back to her feeling bad. So then I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
have to take care of her. And so, really reconciling how do I now deal with a relationship that is still very triggering,
Mm-hmm.
set boundaries in that relationship and boundaries in other relationships, sort of adjacent to that or in similar veins as that. But now I also have my daughter who wants a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with her grandma. And how do
Mm-hmm.
I allow that to happen without policing every part of it,
Yep.
but also then protecting myself and protecting my kid? And that's another layer, I think, to when your trauma is related to any parent or caregiver that you might have if they're still in your life. Like, it's another beast that I haven't yet figured out exactly how to do it in a way
Yeah.
that suits me, where I'm not like constantly charged or angry or overwhelmed in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was the black cloud for me was the validation that my life may have looked like it was okay and I was slightly unscathed. It was
Mm-hmm.
the acknowledging that it was hard and I've had challenges and it took me a long time to go to a my family doctor and say, "Okay, I'm struggling and
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if there is a way that we can explore a PTSD
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
because my life was hard and I think in doing that that was a extremely heightened trauma response. Like they took my blood pressure and it was high, the
Mm-hmm.
highest I've ever seen my blood pressure. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, that's stress. Good to know.
Mm-hmm. This was after your baby, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and that was the first time I let a medical professional
Mm-hmm.
see the black cloud
Mm-hmm.
because I was scared of judgment. I was scared of, well, now we have to medicate you. You're an unfit mother. You're like broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that that aspect of it was incredibly scary. But after the diagnosis, it was like the cloud dissipated.
Mm-hmm.
I named it. I faced it and the cloud dissipated. I'm not saying I'm healed. I don't believe that you're ever truly fully healed. It's a journey. It's not linear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a whack-a-mole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yet naming it is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, what you just named that's so important is when you told somebody, I think people's fears are oftentimes one of two. Either it's going to be blown up and it's going to
Mhm.
consume everything. Like in your case, they're going to think I'm an unfit mother. It's going to be such an extreme thing. And like, what more are they going to find out or see? And, as you've opened up the lid, it's like this panic that something is going to come out that you aren't aware of. And it's going to be so
Yeah,
intense.
like a
Or
Pandora's
the
box.
Exactly, right. Or
Yeah.
the opposite side of no one's going to take me seriously. And now I've shared this thing that feels so painful and it's going to be minimized because likely at some point they've had some sort of minimization of what they've experienced. And so it sounds like you didn't have that reaction then from these providers where they went one way or the other. But it is a very hard thing because you've convinced yourself that telling somebody will result in one of those two things. And you've made it a fact in your brain, even though it is a subjective
Mhm.
projection. You believe it to be fact. And I think that's the part that's really scary is that's the untethering. That is the
Yeah.
detaching from the story, is allowing the possibility that that story might be right and it might not be. And then trusting that you could continue to do this and exist as if this is right, that if you tell anybody that your world's going to end, essentially,
Yeah.
you say, gosh, I've got to have a little bit of hope for something different because I can't do this
Yeah.
the rest of my life. And being willing to there's no way to escape vulnerability. There's always going to be a risk associated with that because the sharing, you cannot control the reaction of anyone else. But what you saw is as soon as you offloaded it, it
Yeah.
lightened.
Yeah.
And once you started to name it, you still had control of the story. You got to share,
Mhm.
you got to talk about what happened, you got to advocate for those things. And there are obviously people that don't have that experience.
Yeah.
It's not a testament that their trauma is the problem. That's a testament to that provider, that person that they chose might not be the
Mm-hmm.
right fit for them. That's an
Yeah.
others problem, not a them problem.
Yeah.
And so I think for people listening, it's the same thing as what you went through. Once I started naming my stuff out loud, I realized I am not going to get stuck in that story. I was stuck in that story before I said it out loud. I just didn't know
Yeah.
it. I was
Yeah.
operating in survival mode for so long.
Yeah.
And I get to choose how I'm defined, not the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the world. And the rest of the world isn't going to come to define me by this one experience if I don't choose to
Yeah.
define myself by that one experience. And that I think is very freeing when you can get to that place.
Yeah. Yeah. It totally is. It's a process of reclaiming the power that you involuntarily was
Yeah.
involuntarily taken from you.
Right. Right. And I think that's really a lot of the work of trauma healing and shame resilience. I call it the radical three. So radical acceptance of what happened, but mostly what's in our control and what's not. And that doesn't mean liking it. That doesn't mean validating
No.
it. That doesn't mean justifying it, making it okay. We're not doing any of that. We're just saying, this happened.
Yep.
This is out of my control. Whether it's that it's in your past, someone else did it, whatever it is, accepting and acknowledging that there are things outside of your control and
Mm-hmm.
naming that you didn't like them and it wasn't okay. And then
Yeah.
the second part is responsibility. So then taking responsibility of what you can control, which
Yeah.
is you getting help, you talking about it, you not allowing yourself to stay in a shadow that somebody else created for you or a group of people created for you or the world has created for you and figuring out what that looks like. And then that third part is radical authorship. And it's saying, I get to choose to write my own story. And there are going to be people that come in that are going to try to write it for me,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's those old voices in my brain from my trauma and that big black cloud trying to come back and take over, or somebody new coming into my life and trying to tell me, or social media trying to write it for me. But
Yeah.
I get to decide. I get to do that. I get to say that I'm a good mom. And you know what? I'm not going to do the color coded sensory experiences and things that everybody else does. That doesn't mean I don't give a shit about my daughter's development. It
Yeah.
just means that's not how I'm choosing to spend my time. And that person gets to claim that they are a good parent, and I get to claim that I'm a good parent. It's not a mutually exclusive thing. And once we can get there, I think, again, it doesn't make it go away. Like you and I
Yeah.
are going to be with these things the rest of our, it's like being in a book. And if there's a
Yep.
tear in the book page, you can tape it, but the tape is still going to be there. So we're just
Yep.
mindful when we go to those pages. We're mindful when our brain gets flipped back to those parts or triggered to go to those spots. That's it. But we do
Mhm.
get to move forward instead of staying stuck in those spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. And I I like to point out the fact that maybe you were responsible as a child for managing your parental figure's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
My kids are not responsible for my triggers.
Yep.
They're
Yep.
not responsible for that. That's on
Yep.
me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if
And
you go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. And, apologizing
Yes.
if there is a triggering situation that comes up and my nervous system fritzes,
Mm-hmm.
going back to my kids and saying, "You know what? Mommy dealt with that in the wrong way,
Yep.
and my nervous system just couldn't handle it, and I got
Yep.
I got upset,
Yep.
and I could do this better, and I'm really sorry that I yelled or whatever."
Right. And that part what you just said is the key piece because if we think about what many of us were longing for growing up, again, whether you had a traumatic experience or not with your caregivers, most of us were looking for that dialogue. I
Yep.
never expected my mom to be perfect. The thing I have a hard time with that I'm still grieving is the
Mhm.
lack of accountability, the lack of
Yeah.
ownership, the overwhelming shame that I think she carries and sort of the unwillingness to move through some of the pain so that we could heal. That's
Yeah.
the part that's hard. And so I think it's you being able to recognize it's the same as like anyone that's ever been around a toddler, even if you're not a parent. Sometimes their reactions do not match what is happening in the world. You're like, what do you mean? We were right here. Everything was fine. And now you're screaming and I can't connect the dots. Their brain is doing the same thing ours is. Ours is just a trauma response. Theirs is normal childhood development. And so if we can look
Yeah.
at it, we're learning the same things at the same time. And so if you can come back in those moments and be like, oh, yeah, I reacted outside of what was going on here. My brain jumped. That took it to a 10. We were at like a 2. And
Yeah.
then talking about one thing I'll do with my daughters, I'll say, what do you think were some things mom could have done differently in those moments? And then I'll offer suggestions too. And so there was a time recently where I kind of lost. I've learned that if I have a little bit of time in the morning to myself, it helps me just kind of like center in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been sick for a few days, hadn't been having that time. I felt really out of it. My husband was working overnight, so he wasn't really around. My daughter was going through, I like to just think about these really beautiful developmental leaps that come with some emotional,
Oh man.
heavy handles. And so I just did not react well to one of our dynamics. And she goes, Mom, I think you need to take a deep breath. And midway through, I just start laughing because I'm like, she's calling, like, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I'm like getting so upset. And it wasn't that big of a deal. But if you can have that, and if you can create the fact that my daughter feels safe enough to call me out on something means I'm doing my job.
Yeah.
Because for us, we felt like we were responsible, we were parentified children, and we
Mm-hmm.
couldn't upset or disturb them. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
safe. And so for her to say, oh yeah, mom, this one's on you. And then there are times I do the opposite. Like, Ev, that was you, dude. Like you reacted in a way that was not okay. You took it to a different level. You chose to be mean and that choice was yours. And that's the other thing I think too is ownership, coming back to that
Yeah.
responsibility. I'm accepting the fact my brain is reacting. It's also my responsibility. I never get to say, well, my kids were doing this. No,
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets to act. We can't control that. I have no control over what my kid does, the same as I can't control the person driving on the highway that cuts me off when I start to go into road rage. Both of those things are out of my control. What I do next is mine to own. And once we claim that, again, it's responsibility, but it's also freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. What a conversation. We covered a lot of stuff. So thank you so much for joining me today. How can our listeners connect with you further if they'd like to?
Yeah, I think the best place is just to go to my website, adversityrising.com, and you'll find links to, I have a YouTube channel. I have my own podcast called Untethering Shame, where we talk about different topics related to shame with guest speakers, which Emily will be on at some point in the future. So stay tuned for that one as well. And they can see some of the other work that I do in my programs and all of that. But I think it's kind of the one-stop shop. And then if you're feeling like you have something you want to talk about, questions, ideas, you want to dive deeper into shame, I think the best thing is just send me an email so we can connect and kind of work through and figure out what those supports could look like for you together.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kyira.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. If you would like more of the Mamahood After Trauma community, make sure to look in the description of this episode for the link to become a Mamahood After Trauma Inner Circle member. Until next time, Mama, keep